invite to the stage Mustafa Akyol. He is our friend. He's an author, journalist, and political commentator. And I think bringing Mustafa to the podium now, especially given what Metropolitan Elpidio Fothas said, is particularly appropriate because Mustafa has written one of the great books out there on trying to explain Islam. And if you haven't read it, you should. It's called Islam Without Extremes, a Muslim Case for Liberty, an Argument from Muslim Liberalism. With that, I invite Mustafa to the stage. He's right there, Kevin.
Thank you, George, for your kind words and for the promotion for the book, which I always appreciate. And thanks to the archons of the Ecumenical Patriarchate for organizing this wonderful conference and bringing us all together from different parts of the world. It's an honor, I must say, to speak after such important holy people. I was an amateur imam yesterday. I'll be trying to be a speaker today, not an imam. Well, one problem of being one of the last speakers is that everybody said what I would have said. And so I will try to be a little bit, less formal about my speech. And therefore, I had a few more technical legal things to explain to you. But let me begin with a story of mine as a Turkish citizen, which gave me an aha moment in my life about the status of non-Muslims in our country. I grew up in Ankara, the Turkish capital. And maybe some of you have been to Ankara. It's not the most diverse city on earth. It's a very homogeneous city that most people are state officials and everybody looks like each other. And at the age of 14, my family, my parents moved to Istanbul. And so I went to a new school. I loved my school in Ankara, but in Istanbul, I moved to a new school. It was the former British high school in Nişantaşı, like a upscale neighborhood in Istanbul. I went to the class, I sat, they said, here's your new friend in class. And there was this, young, student sitting next to me. I said, hello, bro, my name is Mustafa, what's your name? And I was expecting a name like Ahmed or Mehmed or Hassan or something like that. And he said, my name is Alber. And that was really a big surprise. Alber is the Turkish version, or the Anatolian version of Albert. And I've seen the name Albert only in films, American films. And I never thought that a guy who speaks Turkish and who sits next to me in a class in Istanbul would be named Albert, I really had a hard time in understanding. I didn't say anything in the beginning, but then at some point I asked, dude, where are you guys from? Because your father's name is also something that I never heard. Where are you guys from? And he said, we are from Istanbul. What are you talking about? I thought, are you Americans or British who came here and adopted the language or something? He said, no, we are Christians. But we are here for 1,000 years. He said, where you guys came from? That was the first time that I realized that there are Christian minorities in Turkey. Because unless you're living in Istanbul, if you're a Turk living in Anatolia or even Ankara, the capital, you would never see someone who's not Muslim. There are so tiny communities, and you can have friends only if you're in certain areas of Istanbul or maybe Izmir, and a few maybe more cities. Now that is a tragedy for Turkey. That's a tragedy because Turkey used to be a much more diverse place. As many speakers emphasized, the Ottoman Empire was a place where non-Muslims were not 0.1%. They made, by most accounts, 2/5 of the whole Ottoman populace. That is why when the Ottoman Empire opened up a parliament in 1878, 1/3 of the Ottoman parliament was consisting of non-Muslims. Greeks, Armenians, Jews, other Syriacs. And of course, that pluralism is today gone. And how it is gone is an important story, I think, to underline. It has gone mostly because of nationalism. Because during the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the world's latest multi-ethnic, multi-religious entity, the latest big empire in that sense, when it was collapsing, nationalism emerged in every people of the empire, which pitted them against each other. And when these nationalistic ideologies formed nation states, within those nation states, people who used to be your neighbors and who used to be one of the peoples of the empire became the fifth column of a country that you don't trust. And that is why throughout in the 20th century, Turkey, for example, if you speak of a Turkish case, Turkey lost dramatically its non-Muslim population. First with the expulsion, the dramatic ethnic cleansing of Armenians in 1915. Then with population exchange with Greece and with other expulsions. Now, this is a tragic story to underline, but also it's important to remember that before that, we used to live together. And for Muslims, it was an Islamic fact of life to live with Christians, Armenians, Greeks, and other Christians, and Jews themselves as well. Now, these are important today because I think it's important to understand that the problems that we're talking about in Turkey, which is all true, all these illiberal traditions of our state, they emerged out of a political context which not only poisoned Turkey, but all other countries around the region. That is why the lack of minority rights or the lack of enough respect for minorities in Turkey can be actually mirrored in other neighboring countries, in Bulgaria, in Greece. Bulgaria actually had a horrible enforced assimilation on the Turkish citizens of Bulgaria, Turkish community, in the 80s. Their names and even religion was banned. Because Bulgarian state ideology believed that every Bulgarian should be a proper Bulgarian, which speaks Bulgarian and worships the Bulgarian national, let's say, follows the Bulgarian national religion, and diversity was seen as a threat. We should be honest, I think Greece has similar problems. And when you actually read the report of the United States International Conference on Religious Freedom, International Commission on Religious Freedom, I would recommend reading that very important publication. This is published every year by the United States International Commission on Religious Freedom. It's a body by the US Parliament, the US Congress. They look at countries. And please read Turkey and Greece together. There are many things that are similar. Because in both countries, there emerged an understanding of looking at the foreigners among you as a threat. Foreigners is a very wrong term, but it's a legal term used by Turkish courts until recently in Turkey. Non-Muslims in Turkey were defined as foreigners by some Turkish court decisions because they were seen as the fifth column, again, of the neighboring Greece, and their loyalty was questioned. Similarly, the same thing happened in Greece. I was studying this matter, the religious freedom in the Balkans and in our Anatolia and everywhere. I read a sentence, a very interesting sentence, an analysis by the Human Rights Watch report in 2009. It was criticizing some of the religious freedom limitations in Greece on the Turkish community. It said, the Greek state has for the most part been unable to accept the fact that one can be a loyal Greek citizen and at the same time an ethnic Turk proud of his or her culture and religion. When I read this, I said, this is Turkey as well. Same thing. We couldn't accept that our citizens can call themselves Kurds and be loyal citizens. That's why we want to Turkify them and question their loyalty. And the very fact that we tried to Turkify them created a Kurdish question. And of course, they had problems in accepting this very authoritarian intrusion by the state in their lives. So one thing I would underline here, as a Turk who tries to fight for religious freedom and other freedoms in my country, is that this is a regional problem too, and we should see that all together. And I think we will maybe help each other better, in which every society we're discussing, we try to advance religious freedom and freedom of identities, the freedom of people to define themselves and who they are to begin with. In Turkey, they should be able to define themselves as Kurds. In Greece, they should be able to define themselves as Turks, not just Greeks of the Muslim faith, but maybe Turks if they're Turks. Another point, it's been underlined by various speakers very rightly that the Turkish state has this incredible system of coding its citizens. Greeks are given number 1, Armenians given to Jews get number 3. Some of them said, why are we not number 1 but number 3? But that's a joke part. But it's a horrible thing to be codified, to be like stamped by your state and monitored because of your identity. But again, let me tell you one thing. This happens to us as well, the Muslim Turks. We are being filed by our state too. Actually, this is a recent discussion inside Turkey that the Turkish state we have a central intelligence agency called MIT, like the Turkish version of CIA, if you will. Unlike the CIA, which really focuses mostly on foreign issues, the Turkish MIT's job was generally to monitor the society. And it keeps a file on citizens and saying that this guy is too leftist, this guy is too liberal. Well, this is too conservative and too practicing. So being practicing Muslim is a problem in Turkey too. So it's a problem for everybody. So this is actually a recent revelation in newspapers, and we're discussing that why do they do this on all of us? So on one hand, the problem in Turkey is a religious freedom problem. On the other hand, it's a problem of how do we tame the Leviathan, the big state that really thinks that it should monitor and look at all citizens with suspicion. This very city has seen its worst examples. There was an organization called Stasi. I'm sure the Germans know better than me on this. We were never as bad as that, but we had our own version of Stasi, and that is one of the problems. And that's a general democratization problem in Turkey. But how can we move forward? How can we move forward in Turkey, to speak specifically in Turkey? Here are the two problems that I see. And I agree with Dr. Levent Köker on this, very much so. In Turkey, there are two very problematic ideological attitudes which block religious freedom, which oppose the opening of halki, which oppose the opening of churches, which oppose more visibility for minorities. One is secular nationalism. The other one is religious nationalism. And they are sometimes similar to each other, but there are some differences. Secular nationalism generally is promoted by the people who call themselves the proud followers of Atatürk, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, Turkey's founder. And, well, Atatürk was a great leader who did great things for Turkey, but there is indeed a little problem in the heritage that they subscribe to. Because Atatürk, as it is often said, looked at Europe and tried to Europeanize Turkey in the 20s and 30s, right? But there's a little trick there, because Europe was not a very pretty place in the 30s. Turkey incorporated many European institutions. For example, we got our penal code from Italy, who in the 30s was under the rule of Benito Mussolini. So Turkey's westernization includes some problematic aspect of getting authoritarianism from Europe rather than getting liberal democracy. That is why some of those hardcore secular nationalists who claim to follow Atatürk's path recently have emerged as the enemies of Turkey's European Union accession process, because they didn't want the liberal democracy of Europe. They preferred the authoritarianism of Europe, which was incorporated in the 30s, and which still is in at least some part of the Kemalist teaching. And these secular nationalists, there's a very also interesting trick here. They all would despise any non-Muslim presence in Turkey, although they're not practicing Muslims themselves, and they dislike practicing Muslims too. Now that is very weird, but you know, the trick there is that for them, Muslimness is merely an issue of identity that separates the Turk from the non-Turk, But they don't like too much Islam either. Is religion as identity rather than faith can be a very destructive thing. Actually, there are many examples, like not just in our part of the world, but for example, the conflict in Ireland between the Catholics and the Protestants was a conflict of religion not as faith, but merely as identity. There's actually a famous joke about it in Ireland. One night, a man walks in Belfast in the dark. IRA militants capture him. They put him a gun into his face and they say, "Are you a Protestant or a Catholic?" The man says, "Well, I'm an atheist." They say, "But are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic atheist?" That is kind of the mentality of some Turkish secular nationalists, that they wouldn't care if you become an atheist, but if you convert to Christianity, they will be alarmed because you're losing your Turkishness. So that's secular nationalism. That's problematic. That's not going to help Turkey. And Turkey's main opposition party, which has some liberal voices, which I like, needs to get rid of from that secular nationalist authoritarian past, and they have to think about that. Otherwise, they will not really be a promising force for Turkey in terms of freedom. But what about religious nationalism? Well, that is the better of the two problems, the lesser of the two maybe evils, if you will. Well, religious nationalism, if secular nationalism has its golden age in the 30s, where everything is Turkish and nothing other than Turkish can be ever allowed, and we all worship the Turkish father and everything. The religious nationalism has its golden age in the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman sultans, Fatih, Kanuni, these are the heroes, and in that sense it refers to the millet system, the nation system of the Ottoman Empire. And relatively speaking, it is better than secular nationalism because at least accepts that in a hierarchical sense, Christians and Jews have a right to practice their religion in Turkey. I think that religious nationalism is very much echoes in the governing party, the AKP. And it sometimes helps religious reforms. When Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan was asked whether he has a problem with the title ecumenical in the name of the ecumenical patriarchate, unlike the secular nationalists who can't stand to hear the word ecumenical because they think it implies an authority over the Turkish state and nothing can be over the Turkish state, they have a lot of ideas there. Erdogan said, well, Ottomans didn't have an issue with the term ecumenical. I don't have an issue with the term ecumenical. So religious nationalism can be better, relatively better force, and that partly explains the better steps we have taken in the past 10 years. However, religious nationalism has its flaws. It sees everything in a hierarchical sense. Muslims are the supreme nation, and they're tolerating to a certain extent. And there you would have also very symbolic tensions like Hagia Sophia. Because Turkey's religious nationalists generally want to convert Hagia Sophia back into a mosque. Whereas I, as a Muslim, believe that, well, Hagia Sophia is built by Christians, it was converted by Muslims into mosque. Both traditions have a history in that holy building. They should find a way to share it if they can. At least, otherwise, it should stay at a museum. Because if we turn this into a mosque, it will be a big insult to Christianity, and that's wrong. There are people who think like this, and I would call them religious liberals. With secular liberals, they, constitute the way forward, but they're not the dominant voice, unfortunately, right now in Turkey. Two more points. How will we go forward? Well, the biggest obstacle here is this very bad, very illiberal, very illogical, if you ask me, principle of reciprocity. Reciprocity was, brought by the Lausanne Treaty, and it basically means that, we will suppress our minority here unless you do something for your minority there. It's an eye for an eye, basically, doctrine, but it leads to what Gandhi said about the eye for an eye. It leaves everybody blind, right, when you go with that doctrine. The current government says that they have left reciprocity, but in practice, they are certainly following reciprocity. And that is the main reason why the reopening of Halki, which was we were an inch close, was stopped, was just, taken out of the democratization paper recently. I want to give you here a quote from someone from the governing party just a few days ago. in Germany who said something on this. Metin Külünk, he's the deputy chair of the AKP, AKP's Foreign Affairs Committee, and he's an Istanbul deputy. He spoke in Germany, and he said to a group of Turks, "Do not have a doubt. Turkey has not taken a step to reopen the Halki Seminary, and will not take the step until Greece, who did not hold up the promise it gave in Lausanne, opens the Fethiye Mosque in Athens." Now, I want to underline one thing. This is a very bad logic, and I'm very much against it. Even if there are problems in Greece, I would still call on my government to move forward. Even if there are problems in Saudi Arabia, I would call other governments to respect religious freedom. Religious freedom is sacred everywhere. But this is also a reality that we should see. One more note. You know where Metin Külünk said this? To what kind of audience? He said this to an audience of Turks who were members of the Western Thrace Turks Solidarity Association. In other words, the Solidarity Association in Greece, solidarity for what? For more religious freedom for Turks in Greece. Because their logic is that Greece doesn't give us everything we want. Why are you trying to give the Halki Seminary to the Patriarchate? That's what the Turks in that particular audience think. And Metin Külünk is telling them, don't worry, we won't do anything good for them. You know. Now, to repeat, I am very critical of this mindset, but this is a reality. And therefore, I would maybe recommend working for religious freedom on both sides of the Aegean together, so that we can push forward both sides, and maybe it will help each other to move forward. I should also say that EU Minister Egemen Baş said, well, Turkey needs to be encouraged for opening Halki Seminary, again by showing these examples of closed mosques in Greece. Well, I don't want to take much of your time. Everything has been said. But here's, I think, what I would like to underline. To advance religious freedom, we sometimes have to work with pragmatic people who will tell you, well, I will not do anything here unless somebody does that. I will not do anything here unless I get from this. This is a part of the world. This is the reality of the world. We have to work, as genuine believers of religious freedom, we have to work within those logics, and we can't deny them. But we should never forget that we should defend religious freedom no matter what. Whatever happens in this country, we should defend religious freedom in that country and the other country. Because I am very convinced that fundamental rights like religious freedom, they come, as President Kennedy, US President, said once beautifully, they do not come from the generosity of this or that state, the government of Greece or Turkey or this or France, who's generally not very liberal on these issues. Religious freedom comes from none other than God, and we should defend it rigorously, everywhere, in every society, in every size of this Aegean. And I know we will. Thank you so much.